Today is 5 years after the January 6, 2021 insurrection on the nation's capital. What can we say about Donald Trump's legacy as of today? Overall, this is what I'm going to comment on today. My name is Dean and I'm keeping it real here on this channel. Donald Trump obviously inspired and incited the attack on the Capitol 5 years ago this day. But I want to talk more about his overall legacy as a political figure and as a celebrity or so on, rather than focus on the events that happened 5 years ago today. And the reason for that is I want to focus on the legacy of the person that ultimately led to the events that happened 5 years ago today. I think we first have to look at what we know about the personality of Donald Trump. Excuse me. He always saw himself as playing a grand and maybe even grandiose role, as being important, as being a celebrity, as being a leader in business. And I think early on he wanted to be well-liked, be popular, be important, and be more than just someone who succeeded at a job or succeeded in business. He inherited the business from his dad, the Trump Organization. It appears that it was worth about $400 million when he inherited it. And by about I believe it was the late 90s, early 2000s, he ended up filing somewhere between 4 to 6 corporate bankruptcies of his various companies. His casinos ended up going bankrupt in Atlantic City. He would occasionally comment on political issues. You know, he would purchase full-page ads in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times in New York City on political issues, but he mostly stuck to his real estate development businesses that he inherited from his dad, developing the Trump Tower, the Trump hotels, the Trump Casino in Las Vegas, the Trump casinos in Atlantic City, and so on. And I think it was for a certain period of time, he was content to have, quote, made it big and make a lot of money and kind of live the lifestyle of being wealthy and famous and have money and hobnob with celebrities. And probably back then, those were probably the early days when he first met and hung around with Jeffrey Epstein. So, I think he was content to kind of live that lifestyle of the sort of celebrity businessman who he wanted to be perceived as being successful in business, although objectively speaking his record was very mixed in that area. He did do some things in business that were successful. He also did a number of business ventures that failed. You know, you can go over the list: Trump States, the Trump Shuttle Airline, and a number of other. Trump University ended up being found, adjudicated in court to be fraud. It's not a partisan statement to say that. And so a lot of the ventures that Trump tried to put his brand and his name on ultimately failed. But I think the first time, there were a couple times where Trump kind of flirted with the idea of running for president. And I think the first time he actually attempted to run for president was 2000. He saw what Jesse Ventura had done in running for governor as a Reform Party candidate in Minnesota in 1998. And I think Donald Trump saw that and thought that, well, maybe there was a way that he could run for president, possibly under a third party. So I remember in 2000, he put up a website and announced creating an exploratory committee to run for president. And I think he was thinking about running as a Reform Party candidate in 2000. And one of the ideas he had, and I thought it was kind of grandiose and unrealistic at the time, he was going to charge a tax on stock trades and stock transactions. And he said this tax would bring in so much revenue, it would enable him to balance the budget and pay off the national debt. That was one of the main economic planks of his 2000 possible candidacy. I didn't take it very seriously at the time, and I thought it was kind of grandiose and absurd and I think a lot of economists analyzed this and said it was highly unrealistic that a tax on stock trades and transactions was going to bring in enough revenue to pay down the national debt, much less even pay off the annual budget deficit. And Donald Trump did not end up running for president that year, and I think he kind of pulled back the idea and And I think it was many years later, before Trump even kind of dipped his toe into politics. I think 2004, 2008 went by, he didn't run. Now I understand that in 2012 he considered possibly running for president, then ultimately decided not to do that, and he endorsed Mitt Romney in 2012. Of course, in the 2012 election, Barack Obama got reelected again, and then there was an event. There was a National Press Club, they call it, an event where Barack Obama as president kind of told some jokes about Donald Trump that he was offended by. And many believe that was when Donald Trump decided that he might run for president for the 2015 election cycle. So when he started talking about running for president in 2015, I remember at the time I didn't take it very seriously then. I thought, okay, this is another B-rate celebrity saying he's going to run for president. We've seen many of those kinds of situations come and go in the past where celebrities will say, yeah, I'm going to run for president, and sometimes even do, and it doesn't really go anywhere. So I didn't really take seriously the idea that Trump was going to run for president. At the time, he was doing an episode of Celebrity Apprentice. It was doing The Apprentice, did the celebrity version of The Apprentice, and I think there was some question about whether or not that show was going to be renewed for another season. There was some who speculated that, well, he wasn't really running for president, he was just using this as kind of negotiating power to try to get a better deal with whatever the television network is that was carrying The Apprentice, and get renewed for another season at a higher pay rate or whatever. So I don't know where at one point that Donald Trump decided to get serious about running for president. As we all know, he did end up running in 2016 against 16 other Republican nominees for president, and it's still debatable at this point whether he seriously wanted to be elected or what his real motivation in first running. But when the idea took hold and a lot of people started supporting him, it kind of took on a life of its own, and it ultimately resulted in him winning the Republican nomination in 2016 and then narrowly defeating Hillary Clinton in the general election in 2016. And I think it kind of fueled the grandiose personality of Donald Trump once he became president and saw the powers of the office and saw what he could do. And I think it led to the legacy that was created, and unfortunately it was, as we go further into the Trump presidency, he became more divisive, became more polarized, he became more partisan himself. The Donald Trump in 2015 that was perceived to be somewhat of a celebrity and was fairly popular with people on both sides of the political aisle is now perceived to be much more divisive and polarized, strongly supported among people on the right and strongly despised by people on the left. And that's very different than the kind of more celebrity popularity I think he had before 2015, before he decided to become a candidate for public office. And I think a big part of the legacy that we're going to see is that the kind of grandiose personality that he has and desire to be the center of attention and be popular and important became kind of took on a life of its own and kind of grew like it was on steroids and human growth hormones to the extent that it has as he was in the presidency in the first term. And we see that this led to the events of 5 years ago today, when he couldn't accept the fact that he had lost the 2020 election and did everything he could in his power to stay in office and stay in power despite losing that election, and try to overturn that election, do the fake electors, and do all of these efforts leading up to the actual insurrection that happened 6 years ago today. And I think the legacy of that is, by not being able to accept that he lost and not acknowledge that and not be able to admit that he lost an election, he did everything he could to overturn that election and not be perceived to have lost the 2020 election. And that ultimately led to his desire to run for president again in 2024, and then also to vow to engage in retribution and revenge against those who he believed led to the 2020 election defeat, and obviously the various prosecutions that were, the indictments that were handed down against him for the various alleged crimes that he was indicted for, and well as the 34 counts in the case that Alvin Bragg brought in New York City for business fraud that he was ultimately convicted by a jury for doing that. So a lot of his focus has been to seek revenge and retribution against these people that he believed have gone against him. So I think the legacy is that his legacy will have been to have become a very polarizing and divisive figure, and the legacy is still being written at this time with what's going on in the second Trump administration, the various policies that are being put in place, the very authoritarian attempts to take control of the federal government, the very authoritarian immigration policy that's being implemented, the number of people that are being put in, putting these concentration camp style prisons that are being built, the mostly non-criminal people that were rounded up. I think it was 180 or 225 that were sent to the extermination camp in El Salvador, for example. A lot of these things that are being done, and the crackdowns on universities and retribution against law firms that, they're against the Trump administration. Very heavy-handed kind of authoritarian kinds of behaviors that we're seeing in this administration are all becoming part of the legacy that is still being written. But today is 5 days after the January 6th insurrection, and I thought it would be interesting to take a look at what that legacy is and make some comments about it. I think there's still a lot more history to be written. We'll see what happens with the rest of this second term of the Trump administration, and we'll see ultimately that legacy is still yet to be written. But that's what I see as the legacy that's there as of now, and what I see the Trump legacy as of today as 5 days after the January 6th insurrection that happened on the Capitol. So I just wanted to make some comments on that and offer some commentary on that. I thank you all for listening, and please feel free to subscribe to the channel and like this video, and ring the bell for updates on more videos, and I hope to be putting up more content soon. Thanks for listening.